Hey Jess.
Hello. How are you?
Good. So I realized I hadn't gotten back to you about the scheduling and interview thing.
Oh,
When do
don't
you
worry. Yeah, no,
when do you
I wasn't expecting you to.
when do you fly to the East Coast?
On Saturday.
Okay. Let's see. Hey Dan.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Hey. Good. How are
Hey,
you?
Dan.
Doing good. On pins and needles over here.
Closer and closer.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Not making any long-term plans. Jess, did you say you're coming out to the East Coast of the U.S.? Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm coming over for a conference next week.
New York
On
stuff,
ethics.
DC.
Yeah, in New York.
Okay,
New York.
cool. Awesome.
On web archiving. Gonna go hang out at Query with Brendan, and then hang out with Ray at the conference.
That's super
Great.
cool. Hey Ray.
Super cool. Wish I was still in Brooklyn. I would totally take a vacation day to hang out.
Yeah, and like there'll be some
where
familiar
are you,
faces.
Dan?
What's that?
Where are you based, Dan?
Oh, I moved in November to Baltimore, so not too far from DC. But
Yeah.
used to be like within walking distance of Brendan and Ray in Brooklyn.
Oh my gosh. That's so cool.
We kept discovering that we all lived in like Prospect Heights. It was hilarious. One tiny part of New York. Hey, Totally.
Hey, totally. Hey Rob. And hi.
Guys, this is the first time I've had to switch the dev call to grid view in Zoom. This is good.
That is good.
Nice. I think Jake said he was interested, but we can give him maybe a minute. If not, we can just get started. Hey, is this Greg? A new face? Yeah. Are you on mute?
No.
Okay, hello.
Hey.
There we
go. Greg, you might have, I think you had intros last week. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Cool. So why don't we jump into things then? Unless you want to give a quick, yeah, you don't have to do introductions, I guess. But let's see. Let me just. Does everyone have the agenda open? I can also share my screen. But in the agenda under product manager updates, I just want to quickly say that we met with DataCon last week, and then maybe we just use this section to dive into some of the project planning. And then I have just some notes that I threw into a doc that I'll share because I don't think Greg might not have access to it, but this is just a Google Doc to talk about some of the priorities for the next 2 months or so. I definitely wanted to start evaluating where we are, what we think is most important, and sort of work that way. Just because our time is getting limited, and there is some resources coming in, and we do have some resources now, so we might want to start considering throwing some resources at some work. And if you need the Trello,
Yeah, I don't have the access to Trello.
okay. Meaning you can't see it, or you don't have the link?
When I go to the link, it says card not found. I probably need access given to it.
Okay. Well, the only real link into the Trello, we can get you access, is the agenda. So if you have the agenda, it'll have links to the spreadsheet as well as everything else.
Okay.
And then we can go offline and get you access to Trello as needed. So why don't I share my screen? Because some of this is notes that I have, but then also I want to definitely group input on how to prioritize things. And so what I thought to start out with is to just talk about sort of the current work that I see. It's really the stuff on top, I think, is the ongoing stuff. And then some of the laster things like UI improvements and things like that in theory is some work, but it's sort of on a much lower burn. But things keep on cropping up. And so as we work towards trying to, get up Virginista, a lot of our work it's hard to make progress on that kind of stuff just because, we get something like either, the Virginista scraper changed. There were some problems with, I think Rob discovered some NASA pages where our differ was choking on them, right? And it was taking a really long time for it to render. And so, in light of that, and then also how, the fact that, we're sort of, time is, weeks are going by, maybe it's time to sort of re-prioritize like what things that we know are important but are less important, and we might just ignore them even if we know that they're broken, and then just focus, as much of our efforts to get certain things done so that we can sort of make progress in these key areas. Is that making sense? Like in particular, with the Ansible deployment, I know has taken longer than we thought, but I didn't realize the state at which this, like looking at the staging environment, was linked to the work in Ansible. So the fact that staging got off caused other problems, right? Other complications that I think required additional work. So, I think one of the things that I think we really need to do is get staging back online. And so, what's the plan of attack for that? And then, because until we can do those things, then we can maybe finally find time to work on the bulk importing into the Internet Archive. And, do we want to sort of, the other option too is to spend a little bit of the money that we were sort of allocated to Virginista, spend that now up front to throw money at it, and then potentially look at, it's a little risky because the Packard grant, won't come in until, a month or so. And we don't have final approval on that. So, there's some risk in doing that, but it might make it worthwhile to put those kinds of resources up front now. Does that make sense? So I'm not necessarily, there's certain pathways, and first of all, if there's anything under current work that's missing, definitely raise a hand or just start typing things in. But in terms of these things I've listed as critical and high, I'm wondering how people sort of prioritize those things. Sure, Rob?
For stabilizing staging environment, I think, well, it's now stabilized.
Okay.
But I think what you really care about here is the staging environment should be an identical environment to production, or as near
Right.
as possible, so that actually serves all its purposes as staging, which
Right.
is not the case.
Right.
Those are those are different things, right?
Okay.
We now have a staging environment that works again, but it doesn't match production, so it only halfway fulfills its role.
Right.
Right. The history, I guess, or the order of things was a little bit unfortunate, right? So we thought that Kubernetes was definitely the way we wanted to go, or at least we wanted to try it. And so we moved staging over with the notion that in a couple weeks, if everything looked fine and we figured out how to collect the logs properly and get notifications if things went down, that production would imminently follow, right? And having done staging, we knew how to do production, basically. And then after that was done, after we'd moved staging over but not production over, we got that DevOps feedback that pushed us to try Ansible, right? And basically start again. And so now staging is left in limbo, where we might end up doubling down on Kubernetes and moving production over, or we might end up scrapping what we've done in staging and doing everything with Ansible. Or if it all takes too long, we might move staging back to the way it was deployed before, I suppose. But we got this information that made us want to reconsider the Kubernetes deployment when we were sort of halfway launched, and that's why we're in the state that we're in. Okay.
Yeah, so maybe worth saying that, like, technically making them match is a separate thing from Ansible/deployment, but it's kind of a very small thing that immediately follows on from Ansible/deployment.
Right, and they're definitely related.
Yeah.
And so, but the question is, I guess, why don't we just start with the staging environment then? So, it is, like Rob said, stabilized or fixed for now, but as more time goes on, they're going to get out of sync again. Is that correct?
No. Well, I mean, they're not going to get more. The question of being able to keep them in sync in terms of running the same stuff is solved as of yesterday. The question of making them work the same at a level below the software is 95% the Ansible deployment question, and then following it on, unless we want to go backwards and add $100 to my credit card every week or every month.
Right.
Which I'm not super excited about.
Yeah, I don't think anyone wants that to happen. So
I meant more going backward toward like a manual deployment, Rob, not necessarily a Heroku deployment.
Well,
but I don't think it's
what I'm trying to say is that, like, staging as of yesterday is now doing all the things we need staging to do, other than be a matching platform for deployment. Like, so we can keep it up to date and we can deploy to staging and make sure it works in staging and then deploy to production. But because the underlying platform is slightly different, the way the deployment happens will always be slightly different, which, is, I mean, it's still my fault destroying everything over the weekend, but that also partially happened because it deployed fine to our staging, but not to the Heroku production. Right. And there's no way to fix that problem other than rolling staging back to Heroku, which puts it back on my credit card. Like, even if we made it manual, it wouldn't change anything, right? It would be the same problem. And I'd rather have it be in the Kubernetes thing we have now that's working, that I have some process around, than being totally manual.
Absolutely.
Okay. That's good to know and define. So the other thing then is, if we don't want to roll back, I mean, so is rolling back to the former state and is not an option then? We want to stay with Kubernetes.
I think that's off the table. I was sort of putting that out there as a straw man. I don't think anyone thinks that's the way to go.
So is it then the next thing to do is we just should try to throw as many resources as we can, whatever that means, to, like, in terms of people for the Ansible deployment? No.
I think that's a Mythical Man Month style problem. You're not going to solve it by putting more people on it. It is just one of those things that is a very researchy problem, and it's going to take the time it takes because it's the novel unsolved problem. that requires
Right.
the creative work.
Okay. Unless we, I mean, go out and try to find someone who's done this before, right? I mean,
I think the difficulty here is there doesn't exist someone who's done this before and also knows all the details of how our system works together and which parts and sort of the not just their like position but also their velocity, so to speak,
Right,
like how
right.
we expect they'll work later.
sure.
I don't want to refuse help, and obviously if I vanish, there will have to be a handoff, I assume.
Right.
You guys want to wait a bunch of weeks, but
So,
my feeling is still that our best bet is for me to just keep plowing along,
Okay.
rather than onboard someone else into the problem.
right.
Rob can, well, by all means, say if you think I'm wrong about that.
I don't have any. I feel like I should defer to you on that because you're the one who's actually doing all the work and is familiar with what's hard and not, and what's taking your effort and not, and whether it makes sense to spend some time bringing somebody else on board or not.
Right. Because I mean, if it's not just a matter of like, yeah, the Mythical Man month, you know, I totally get that idea. We just can't throw more, you know, like 10 people doesn't mean it happens 10 times faster, but, because we could throw 100 people, right, or whatever. But I guess the thing is, if our estimate is truly infinite, I mean, you know, what we need plans of what happens if this doesn't happen until May, until June, until July. I mean, we should think in those terms so that, you know, obviously we're dealing with imperfect information and there's no way we can sort of say like, oh, we, you know, if we do X, Y, and Z, it'll be done by like Friday or next Friday or a month from Friday. But we sort of need to think about, you know.
Okay. Here's a thought. It's a little early to start to draw any conclusions about lessons learned from trying to deploy this with Ansible. But I think that using Ansible to deploy multiple services that have to talk to each other and find each other on a private network is not a great fit for Ansible compared to some of the other things that Ansible is really designed for. And I'm learning that Kubernetes, in all of its magic, gives you that just for free, and that is very nice. So I think at the end of this process, it's likely that we'll say Ansible is not a far and away better choice than Kubernetes, and that Kubernetes has certain advantages. I'm not saying that I think Ansible will be a worse choice. It might still be a slightly better choice, but I don't think it's going to be a wildly better choice. So we could set a deadline and say, if I'm headed off to the hospital later this evening, or if for any reason this takes a really long time, we just move production to Kubernetes because it seems to be doing sort of okay, at some specific date. Is that a useful formulation?
Yeah, I mean,
I was just going to ask, what is the complexity in the deployment? Is it all service discovery, or is there like a lot of service configuration?
Both, I would say. Probably more in there's something like 40 or 50 different pieces of configuration, which feels like a lot.
Okay.
When you add up all the all the pieces across all the apps. Rob's making a face. Maybe it's 30 or 40. But we're thinking of all the MVARs in Heroku. Take a look at how big that's grown now, with the different configs and stuff.
Well, I mean, it's worth pointing out there at least that like we can get rid of all of the differ ones except for the one. Like, we fix that. Those are just they're meaninglessly sitting around there now. They're not actually doing anything.
That's true. That's something I meant to circle back on and make sure that is actually true when we remove them. I think it should be true. Anyway, so I don't know. I don't think it's a terribly complex thing, but it's a lot to go from zero to working. And also, I'll be the first to admit that I'm not the best person we could have found for this job. So I don't know, Greg, if you have spare cycles and you want to be onboarded into this, I'll walk back what I said earlier, and
I am just learning how things are plugging together still at this point, so it might be a good time to learn that.
There shouldn't really be any discovery, like service discovery.
Right. It's
all
more
hard
about
to figure.
pointing these things at each other. The ones that can see each other publicly, it's easy. The specific point that I happen to be sort of like going through various like paths and trying out, seeing what fits, is how to let the DB app find the differ when we do not want the differ to be public. That is a
Right.
thing that Kubernetes makes very easy.
The madness that is AWS VPCs.
Exactly.
I
For
mean,
an expert, I'm sure that would be trivial. But
I think maybe if it makes a difference, that we should not worry about it, because like the problem we're trying to solve is the concerning security problem of somebody could use the differ to abuse another site. And we can solve that in other ways, right? By just giving
Yeah.
a differ an environment variable like the DB has, which says, I can only talk to these places.
Right. So this is one of the many approaches that I am evaluating, right?
Okay.
And if there's an easy way to just do this, because I'm sure someone has figured out a way to do this with Ansible and EC2, then that would be better. If there's not, then making the differ public and putting up some safeguards is better.
Yeah. I also think it's not even an emergency problem to solve in any way, because the current differ for production is public.
Yeah, that's true.
And so it already has this problem, and we don't see it being abused. So, because we're not like announcing this thing to the world, so it's fine for now.
Yeah, that's true. It's nice that
I mean,
on
we
the
should
staging
fix it,
deployment,
but
we
yeah.
don't have this. Yeah, we
Right.
don't have this problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hate to take a step back, but so I'm aiming for rough feature parity so we can get a fair comparison between how good these are.
Okay.
Right. Okay. I mean, do we want to try to have a deadline date of when we roll back to, or just go with Kubernetes? I mean, because the thing is, if you rush to the hospital, that could be just plus 3 weeks to
Right.
any of that work, or month or whatever.
Right.
And then we would be getting still sleep deprived Dan versus active fun. I get 7 to 8 hours Dan of sleep.
Yeah.
Unless you're like my oldest niece who like was immediately a great sleeper. I mean, I'm praying for that too. So
I know all the guys I went to grad school with who had kids were a lot more productive than I was. It has a way of focusing things as well.
okay, yeah,
Anyway,
right. So
that's
yeah,
on topic. I do
Okay.
think it might be useful to set up a time at which a deadline for making the choice between these two things.
okay. Is that like April 1? Is it past that? Or do you feel like you can't make that decision yet?
I don't know if I can make that decision, because if I go like tonight, what do you guys want to do? Do you want to hand it off to someone at IA? Do you want to throw Greg into the deep end with some help from Rob and see if he has some time to help finish this thing? Or like, what are they? It seems like there's a lot of different ways we could go.
If you want to throw me in the deep end, I'll figure it out.
Maybe we should get a call sooner than later, even though this thing isn't totally done, and record the call. And Greg, if you can be there, you can either help me expedite the last phase or put the whole team in a better position to transition for a couple of weeks. Maybe
Okay.
that's our action item instead of a hard date. Do you like that? Right?
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great.
right.
So that's setting up a call with Owen from Internet Archive, right? That's their DevOps guy.
I was going to say with Greg actually, and wait on Owen until
Oh,
we're
okay.
ready for more like review stage.
Okay. Sorry, I got confused a little bit the when you said IA, like setting up call IA or something.
Oh, maybe I just misspoke. Anyway, I
Okay.
was imagining that. So I had a plan to have a call with Rob pretty soon, and anyone else who's free and interested. And I think we should make it a point to do that at a time that Greg can also come.
Oh, okay. Got it. Yes. I can help facilitate that. That sounds great.
Great,
And hopefully we can do that same maybe in like the next week or so
definitely.
or sooner.
Yep.
And then, after that we can make a plan. Okay. Great. The so in the next, 5 minutes, we can obviously spill into the dev call too, is, the whole like version 0.02, and Greg, that's our milestone for getting off of Virginista and getting all our data from the Internet Archive. And so, there's a issue out, I think it's like 86 or something, but it's basically writing a bulk import script to, start pulling from the Internet Archive. And it's this thing where we don't even know how far we are, so we just need to sort of do, in my mind, the way I think about it is like, we need to do like a large scale test to see what happens. Am I thinking of it? Is that a good way to think about it?
I mean, I think we can reasonably say how far we are,
Okay.
which is all the things that have to be done other than writing a script that does anything more than give me a page and I'll import it, that instead says, give me a list of all 30,000 pages and I'll import them, and then automating that to run once a day is done. So literally all that has to happen is to write a Python script that uses all the same under the hood tools, and instead of taking one ID, it queries to DB for a list of 30,000 IDs and runs those. And then scheduling it to run probably once a day, because that's a lot. We're trying it once and seeing how long it takes, and then figuring out what a reasonable schedule is based on that.
Did you want to run that through your current, I think it's a Node server that you have for this, or like a cron job, or do you have feelings on this?
My assumption was to set it up in the same shitty way that we have Virginista set up, which is just have that scraper that server that is dedicated to basically ETLing data from other places.
Right.
Also have all the right Conda stuff so that it can run the Python app, and just add another cron entry that says run it on this schedule. Which is, it's not like some perfectly wonderful thing, but it's a pretty solid, reliable setup that has worked well for us for most of the year now. And it's easy to maintain. There's no complexity in it. And it's just, just SSH in there and get updated when you have changes, and manage it that way. And it works, and it's been reasonably reliable, and I would assume to just do it that way. And so then it's just about run that for however long we think we need. Well, then it's just about running it from that point on. And how long do we feel on the technical end without huge hiccups is clarifying, and then how long on the analyst end do they need with it to feel like we can stop looking at Virginista now?
Right.
Because it's probably much more about the analysts than it is about us on the technical side. So I think the technical work that needs to happen is really clear, and it is relatively minimal, because all the code that does the importing, that does all the progress management, that does all the communication with IA and all the communication with our DB is all written. All that has to happen is a script that says, ask a DB for a list, and then instead of running all the same commands against one URL, run them against that list of URLs. And that's it. So, yeah, I think it's a minimal technical stuff that's left. All the other things are now done.
That's great. I guess the other thing, though, is the things that block that work are, these more emergency kinds of work where, like, Virginista changed their file format or whatever, and then, that causes a whole scramble of work. And then, some of the trickling effects of having staging, not working the way staging should work causes additional work. So, and then also, there was like you notice those pages from NASA that were making the diffing server puke, for lack of a better way to describe it. I guess the thing is, how do we want to prioritize, say, like those NASA diffing pages over this bulk importing script? I mean, is it some point where maybe we just don't make any other additional fixes, and if we can't do some changes to like improvements to well, first of all, like for the NASA stuff, does that stop everything from working, or does that just mean for those NASA pages we're not going to get comparison, we're not going to be able to diff those?
It just means that diffing those NASA pages is really slow.
Okay.
And it's slow enough that often one part of the system will give up and close the connection before it finishes. So the DB that's in the middle proxying the API will say, this took too long, I gave up. Or the browser that the user is using will say, this is taking too long, I give up.
Right. Can the differ recover from that? Will it keep up?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the differ has no problem with that.
Okay.
Which part does it give up on? Is it the, since there's several links, which one's timing out?
Yeah, so the way this works, so there's the diffing server, which is part of web monitoring processing, which just holds all the algorithms for doing diffs between pages. And it's a very, very thin server. And you give it two URLs and it'll run whatever diffing algorithm you ask against those URLs. And then the DB server, which has sort of at this point been built up to be sort of the canonical API to all our stuff to do with like web monitoring, is most of the time acting as a proxy to that differ server. So it has an API endpoint that pretty much all it does is call through to the differ server. The only difference is you give our API the records, like I want to know the diff between these two versions of this page, and it figures out what URLs and checksums and everything to pass to the diffing server. And so it sort of proxies that connection so that there's one place to talk to get all the things in our system. So it's sort of a unified API, but it also doesn't have to be there. The UI could talk directly to the differ until such point as we put the differ in a VPC where the outside universe can't see it, which is this thing Dan was talking about earlier. But so that's where the other things sit in the middle, right? So the UI basically says, I'm looking at these two versions of a page. I want this diff of them. And it calls to the API server, and the API server for that particular call pretty much just proxies it through to the differ. The UI has enough information that it could actually call directly to the differ, but it seemed like a much easier, clearer way to present a public interface would be through that API server. So that's why we do that proxying.
Okay.
It also means there's only one place we have to worry about caching and security.
Right. We have some sort of long-term thoughts about caching, I think, that we haven't brought up in a while, but that the proxying would help.
Yeah, I was going to ask, this all seems very memoizable, so I was...
Yeah.
Yes. The DB server, the API server does do caching. I think the only thing it does very aggressive caching on is the diffing routes, because everything else has much harder questions around memoizability. Because all that data for any given change can change. But a diff is theoretically always the same until such time as we change the algorithm. And then there's a environment variable that just says last time that the algorithm was updated, that causes the DB server to know whether to ignore the cache for a particular request or not. And it caches everything in a Redis store, I think, for 2 weeks, I think is the cache lifetime right now. But we could probably turn it up and it might be fine.
So, and this is maybe segueing to some of the stuff we generally talk in the the normal planning. But for Rob, so right now, what work is blocking that writing that import script as of today?
Now, nothing.
That's a great answer. So, I would say put that in priority over, say, those NASA pages, and just so that we can sort of get it up and get an idea of how well it's working and how long it takes. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Or sound like a good plan? Great. Also, I just wanted to mention that we had told them the Internet Archive. We were very sort of wary of being involved in Google Summer of Code just because of our own capacity. We got on their list of projects, and so I think there is some activity, as we see in the channel. They're an important partner, so I think we'll just manage that. But having some of that information on deployment and things like that in their brains too, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. But we'll just be mindful if it gets, if we don't have the capacity to support that, we can have communication with them too. At least that was my sort of take on it. I don't know if you already are sort of getting concerned, like let me know now, let me know offline, and we can figure something out. I think also, I had a conversation, just to let you guys know, I just was catching up with Nick a little bit, and he had mentioned something that I just found out about so this morning or late this morning, that, and I need to get information about it, but I think Kevin might know a little more too, that he was Lindsay was approached by Mark at the Internet Archive about funding their scraping, and so it's because they do this for a paid service, which they're doing now for free. And I think it wasn't sort of it was very sort of just an open-ended question. Kevin, I don't know if you know more, but feel free to sort of fill in any blanks, because I think there was some discussion on the private steering committee channel.
I think it's basically because they have a archive it service, which is a couple $1,000s a month that they usually, that's what they charge for companies that use it, and they've been offering that free for us. And then they're just asking because they I guess they're aware of the funding that we're receiving soon, so they were asking if possible to start paying that fee, just because they've been doing it for so long for free for us. But yeah, that's the context. I don't know the decision going forward. I think one of the things I wanted to bring up, it never happened, I think, for the best practices when we're talking about how we work with, when we start dealing with external partners using our platform, and how we get support either through developer support or just financial support. That would be nice to if anybody if we can ask people to kick back towards financial support for some of this crawling that they're doing for us. That's the background. Does that make sense?
Was there a more recent conversation, within the last week or so, or weeks? Just because this happened, initial contact between Mark and Lindsay was maybe more than a month ago.
Yeah, it was a while
Mark
ago.
Actually, followed up with me and said, "Oh, by the way, I had a conversation with Lindsay. Don't want to make it seem like I'm going behind your back. We want to have these conversations, and see where they go." So,
Yeah,
nothing more recent, Kevin?
No, nothing more recent. I saw it a while ago. It probably was in January or something. And then I meant to bring it up during the best practices stuff, but then that kind of has fallen off.
Oh, okay. So this was when they were talking okay. I thought this was earlier than, okay. That is making more sense, because then I came in contact with Mark since then. Mm-hmm. Okay. I thought this was happening. I thought this was much more recent than what Tony just described.
Yeah.
Okay. This is making a lot more sense to me now of stuff. But, there was also this idea too, that they do provide the service, and maybe if we, if we do, my impression too is that if we do become a paying customer of them, can we change also, maybe they'll just be a more supportive partner with communication requests and development requests and things like that, working with them. And it's also nicer that they have like, a more standard API and stuff like that set up, which I'm presuming would be the same from Archive It. And, so they wouldn't be changing, file formats without letting their users know beforehand, right? So we wouldn't have these sort of blow-ups like we had in the last week. So that's okay. That clarifies some things for me too. It's good to know that. It's good to know though also that they sort of had broached this in the past too, because it also sort of will rejigger some of our sort of funding planning, things like that.
Can I ask, has there been any, don't let me derail you, Ray.
No, go ahead.
Has there been any discussion about IA vendoring the software in a way similar to how GovWebWatch is thinking about vendoring the software? And would that, if there was an IA branded, Differ app or the potential for one, would that be a sort of in-kind donation that might sideline concerns about financial donations?
So I don't know if you were on the channel, but the GSOC thing Ray is talking about is one of their GSOC students, I guess, proposed using RStack to view changes in pages in Internet Archive, any page. And so all the discussion was basically about doing that.
Okay. I think I did see that, and was glad to hear Ray clarify why there's an edgy IA GSOC thing. I guess it makes sense now. But do we get the sense that this is like something that IA might want to keep building on at the end of GSOC?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Depends how it goes.
Where's the shrug emoji?
I've had on and off conversations about collaborative work with them around diffing for like the better part of 6 months now. And it's sort of like, we have all these cool ideas. This would be so great. And it's like, yeah, that would be great. And then nothing actually happens.
Yeah.
And I think there's a high risk that like, even if something does happen with a GSOC student, then it kind of gets left behind at the end of the day, because if they didn't have the time or energy to build or maintain it to begin with, they're not going to suddenly magically have the time or energy to maintain it after.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like they're most likely just strapped for resources, given what they're trying to do with the amount of money they have. But who knows? Maybe this is the spark that goes, oh, this is actually would be really useful for a web archive to have.
Dan, do you have, or Rob, or anyone else for that matter, beyond, like, it makes a lot of sense to work with IA, but do you have other ideas for who might, be able to host or contribute to diffing or has a stake in this, like running the platform even?
Like other folks besides IA and GovWebWatch who would want to be like using the tools?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would differentiate. Just between like Sunlight would be using the tool, but like IA would probably be helping like deploy it or run it or like contribute to it. So I don't think we should be talking about those in the same way.
What about the Quaxon folks and and potentially media organizations once the thing is a little more boxed up? Reach back out to Nate, whose last name is escaping me, who came to the Data Rescue NYC from the New York Times, and other like engineering side folks at media organizations. But that again, we're not. We would need better documentation and capacity to talk to those people. But if you're asking that question, that's who I would.
Right. Yeah. I think for on the media side, it would be like the New York Times that had like a labs, because they're big enough that they can have like a labs. I think the Post now might have a labs department, especially with like Bezos' money behind it now.
Atlantic.
Also ProPublica.
Right. ProPublica is ProPublica, or potentially I don't think that I'm wondering what the appetite is, and I don't think it's actually great. But like the Knight Foundation, Mozilla Foundation. Outside of like Mozilla software, I think the Mozilla Foundation does support some software like the Coral project, which is that commenting project, which is housed under the foundation.
Ray, Brendan had pitched in the chat that we might nix screen share so we can see more people at once. Does
yeah.
that make sense?
Brendan's here? No.
Yeah. But let's see.
Well, I guess one point to make there is even if it doesn't make sense to, or however we want to approach this, it might contribute to lighting a fire for IA, being like, hey, we're thinking about other options. They're like, oh shit, like they might go talk to ProPublica. Maybe we should really take this. I don't know. Like, if we're talking about lighting a fire, that's actually, that could be part of the strategy.
Yeah. Although in some ways, IA is the most logical person to integrate, but the data is always going to be there. So, who becomes like another maintainer of the backend stuff, could be anyone besides the point of where the data is coming from. I mean, lots of people use IA data. So
I just think we need to make it like seem real for them, because they keep kicking it down. And obviously they know like money's coming in, maybe that'll make it real, but
right. And I did ask about potentially like writing grants together to them, and they said that they generally don't do that, and usually the grants they go after are larger sort of foundational grants just to support their stuff, and they don't do sort of smaller project-based things with partners. I think they just don't have the capacity to sort of manage those kinds of relationships, is my guess. Okay, so we've got about 13 minutes left. Do you want to shoot, we've already done a lot of it, but would you like to, why don't we quickly go through the developer updates? And then maybe if Toli has a couple of minutes to give an analyst update, we can do that. So I'm just gonna go down the list. Kevin, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. I had one PR review by Rob and Mershit this morning. So replacing all the old sites agency stuff with tags and maintainers. And it was cool. Learned a lot. So it was awesome. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Let's see, Dan.
Sorry, something wild is happening on my porch. Can you skip me and I'll be right back?
Sure. Just quickly, I finished the new template updates, the new issue template, and then I got the IA health check working with using the inner archive.py file and also the DB script, which is great. I'm still having trouble with my, something's wonky with the way I've installed the project. So I am going to try to do a fresh reinstall of everything and see if that fixes it. But somehow, it's not finding one of the folders. And I have to sort of I had to make an edit to the internet archive.py file, which is not cool, but I got just to get it to work. So I'm going to circle back and try to fix that. Okay. Dan, is your porch not on fire, or?
Yeah, super rowdy, like survey takers or something. I don't know what was happening out there. It was weird. Get off my lawn. Okay. So I have been trying to review Rob's stuff as fast as he writes it, as best I can. Did notice that the page freezer Python rester, this is not to the diffing stuff, but to their storage, broke down, and I have put up a PR removing that from the code base. We can always check it back out from a branch if we ever need to use that again. I'm not sure if and when we will, but that is in the spirit of removing confusing stuff from web monitoring processing and getting it ready for a release, which is good. Ansible stuff, just to quickly summarize, continuing to work on that, focusing on making it work as a local deployment that you can use to quickly get all of our services running on your local Mac or Linux laptop, which seems like something we really need, as well as something that could then reach out to AWS. And hard to estimate how long that'll take, but putting a lot of time into it today and yesterday. And as soon as that's done, I will assist Rob with anything that remains to be done with this IA scraping and differ performance, I think.
And just quickly, I think I posted it, but in case anyone missed it, we did reach out to PageFreezer and said, oh, this doesn't, this is returning empty. And they said, oh yeah, we took it down. They're due deeping. It should be back up in a week or so. Put a week in quotes, like a tech week. And so good that they weren't surprised, like Rob said they might be. Yeah, but also on my list too is we still need to do the like our internal retrospective for them. So I'll maybe try to take a swipe at that. It can be brief, and then Kevin.
Just a quick question on the subject of PageFreezer. Totally, did you let them know that the blog post was out, or did they get a response?
Yeah, they're aware. Michael Reddick responded acknowledging. They also retweeted our tweet. So seems like
awesome.
We made the connection.
Cool.
Thanks again, Kevin, for pushing that through.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I saw your comment, Kevin, asking for help with the second piece, and we'll. I guess that's actually what I'll do after Ansible if it's time.
Yeah, I figure, like, I don't know. I'll just get to it when you have some time.
Right. And it wouldn't be an edgy meeting if a pet didn't appear on one screen. So.
So cute. I don't think I've seen that before.
Okay.
This is Rosie. Hi, Rosie. Hey.
Right. Rob, do you want to go?
Sure. So I'll try and give a quick breakdown of this weekend. So the first thing is I had to fix some issues with the scraper because Version needs to change their UI again, which caused us to have a bunch of very, very terrifyingly wrong links, which some of the analysts saw as an impact in the number of pages on their sheets last week, because it happened near the end of that last run, and then I didn't catch it for most of a week. So also, totally, I don't know to what extent you're using Versionista Scraper or other stuff, but if you are, you should update. And if you're keeping any records of things, you might want to go back to, I think March 7th, or maybe 4th, I forget. I'll look up the date, and see about rescraping from that point forward, because that's the point in time at which they changed the URLs and the point in time at which you would have started getting bad URLs. Basically what happened is they used to so in the table that we scan for all the high level data about like what pages and what metadata we have for those pages, one of the entries is a link to the actual live site, and that's how we figure out the URL that like that page is about. In the way that it has it, it doesn't list it in a canonical form where it just shows the URL. The only reliable thing is the link to that page. And that link used to work by going through Versionista internal redirect. So the link would be like versionista.com/view URL ? And then the actual URL. And so we very naively said, cool, let's just look for that ? And then we know everything after that is a like surprisingly unencoded URL, and just take that. And then a week and a half ago, they changed it to just actually be a direct link instead of going through a redirect where they could track it or anything. So at that point in time, everything mostly worked fine for 9 out of 10 pages, which is pages where the page we're looking at doesn't have a query string in it. Because then it would just say, there's no question marks, I'll just take the whole URL, which is how I wrote it. I don't know why I wrote it that way, because it seems like it would have been a bad idea, but it saved us most of the time in this situation. But then for a page that does have a query string in it, it would cut off the actual main part of the URL and only include the query string. So you'd have like http:// like return URL query equals like, site 5 and whatever, like whatever the query string was about. So that was bad. And so went back and fixed the scraper to account for that, and also to be a little bit more strict in what it expects to find there. So it throws errors if it doesn't find something that seems reasonable. So we'll also be more aware earlier when something, if that ever changes again or changes back. So that was that change, and I wanted to bring that up so that you knew about it totally, because I don't know if you're using that version of that script, in which case you need to update. The PR is in the agenda notes, so you can check which version you need to update to, but if you just take current master, it should work fine. And then the other big thing that happened was that I totally destroyed our production database. Mainly, I just destroyed all but 15 page records, but all the version records and all the sort of more core critical data is still there. But basically, what happened there is the big change I deployed over the weekend was our addition of sort of deduplicating URLs by cert key and canonical URL, so that we can pull in lots of data from Internet Archive instead of pulling in one and then having to clean everything up. Now it just works. So it basically looks to say like, oh, http:// something is exactly the same as https:// that same thing. Or we assume that it's the same until we later decide it's not, and we can split them out. But the baseline assumption is that those are the same. There are several other things that we consider to be sort of the same. And adding that field is fine, but the second part of that migration was to then condense all our pages by that, which in reality should have removed about 900 or so pages from the database, which is a good sign, because out of just under 30,000, we're only taking out 900, which means we were relatively well deduped to begin with. But instead, it wound up taking 28,800 something. So what happened is that when I ran it on staging, it was fine. But I had also, at a similar time, done a thing I thought was clever and had not yet ever deployed something using it, which was Heroku has this feature I didn't previously know about called releases or release dynos, which basically lets you tie a command to a release. So once it builds your release, it then runs that command, and if the command fails, it considers the release to have failed, and then it doesn't do the release, which is pretty nice, and it's a good place in theory to put your migrations and say, build the release, run the migrations. If the migrations fail, they roll back, and we don't actually put the release into production. However, it doesn't handle it very well if Heroku decides to crash your application in the middle of that script, because it decides that it's taking too long or taking too much memory. And since Heroku's constraints are dramatically smaller than our constraints when we're running the migrations on AWS, that's what it did. And that is coupled with the fact that when we run the migrations manually, if there's one that's destructive that's doing things like this deduping, I try and be careful to make sure we have a backup of the database before running it. But because it ran automatically, I totally forgot that I needed to do that before pushing the deploy instead of before manually logging in to exec the migrations. So there's no database backup to roll back to. So what followed from that was most of a day of me rebuilding all our page records, which is eminently doable because none of the core data that's special was lost. It's just the pages. The problem is that all the links to views in the UI depend on those page IDs, and they're all going to be different if we build whole new pages. So I was then looking at how to fix the links so they kept working for people. And happily, I took a nap somewhere in the middle of this and woke up and realized, oh, nobody's annotating things right now, which means the only types of changes we have in the database are new pages and versions coming in. And we keep a record of all the raw import data that anybody sends to the database. So I can just roll back to an old backup and replay all the imports that happened in the intervening time, which is what I did, and eventually solved the problem. And so basically my fault, but also this feeds back to that question about we need to get back to a point where staging is the same as production in terms of how it's set up and how it runs, and not just running the same version of the software, because it is totally my fault, but it is also a little bit precipitated by the fact that it ran fine in staging. And so I was not prepared for it to totally crash in an unexpected way in production. I should have been prepared for that regardless, but anyway. So that is the important thing to understand over the weekend, and how and why it went down. And then there's a whole bunch of other sort of assorted fixes over the course of the week, including getting all the stuff done for getting all the Docker stuff that Dan had started, getting it cleaned up and merged in so that we can redeploy with Kubernetes new versions of everything, so that we can have an up-to-date software on staging, even if the platform it's running on is different. And then that search stuff and the other side of it, pulling out any kind of source type when we generate sheets for the analysts, so we can include IA data in those sheets if we want, is done. So that's all the things that stand in the way of doing larger non-one-off imports from Internet Archive. And then the other thing is I plugged around for an hour and got working, and has been super helpful in the intervening 2 days. Got working basically continuous deployment of the Docker images to Docker Hub. So whenever we merge to master, Circle builds the image and deploys to Docker Hub, or publishes to Docker Hub. So it doesn't deploy our image, but it makes it so that all I have to do for deployment is change the Kubernetes config to point to a new tag and then kick it, which is super nice. So we should probably do that for all the other repos if we continue to stick with Kubernetes or continue to use Docker in any capacity. It also uses Circle's hold feature or approval feature, which basically means it doesn't actually build and publish the image unless you actually go to Circle and click, yes, publish this one, which is nice, so that we don't necessarily publish a new image for everything that merges, because if we merge a bunch of commits in quick succession, we probably only want to have one new image published. So yeah, if anybody wants to take a look at how that works, that PR is also in the agenda notes. So I think those are the only big things I wanted to call out.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. We're running a little over, but I just want to give a chance for Greg. If you have any quick questions, or do you want to give an update on what you've been poking around with?
Mostly I've just been looking through the web monitoring database repository, trying to understand how it's structured, since it seemed to be the most important one of the bunch, unless there's a better thing for me to be poking my eyes at. But yeah, just getting familiar with it, getting it set up. I've tried running tests with it, and they fail, so not all of them, just a few of them. So is it currently at a good build state off of master, or should I be seeing unit test failures or not?
You should not be seeing failures. We do have continuous integration, so everything on master should be always passing.
Okay, then I'll just figure out what I've done wrong with my setup.
Okay. I am probably super busy today, but feel free to drop stuff in Slack or whatever chat, and I'll try and get back to you if you're having trouble with it, and I'll help you out.
Okay. Beyond that, I noticed two particular issues on the web monitoring DB repository that I could probably easily do, which is the seed script should prompt if archiver.allowed host is empty, and add support for caret and dollar version identifiers. Those look pretty easy to just jump in on.
The second one, the caret and dollar version identifiers, I don't know if I pointed to the particular posting code where that is, but
I think I noticed where it was in the repository.
Cool. Yeah, the change model has like an API ID method that does that translation, and that's probably where you want to do it. But yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
So I'm mostly just doing this in my spare time, so those will be simple ones. But if you guys need me to be a little bit more focused because we're committing to tight schedules, just let me know in advance.
Great. That sounds good.
Greg, do we already know your GitHub handle? Sorry if I...
I don't really have a lot on it. I've always kept things fairly private, so...
Okay.
In this case, I just started doing some more.
The Kubernetes and Ansible repos are both private because we want to review the security of them carefully before we make them public.
Okay.
I was going to share them with you. Is your GitHub handle the same as your Zoom handle?
Well, not Zoom handle, but it's same email address. It's greg.blike.
Easy enough.
Or maybe it's gblike, I forget. Like I said, this is just starting to be a professional repository as opposed to all the private stuff I've been doing.
Yeah, no worries.
No judgments. Cool. Brendan, do you want to give a quick thing and then we can wrap it up?
Yeah, this is going to be really quick. So crawls are crawling. We think we've successfully crawled January 19th snapshot and EPA.gov. I'm seeing 67,430 entries for EPA.gov and 58,209 entries for January 19th snapshot. So I'm going to do it again. I'm going to double check. As URLs, so highly normalized URLs. So that's what I'm seeing right now. There was a really funny crawler trap in the actual URL. As it turns out, with EPA.gov, you can hit search /search and it'll link you to more things that just continually send you down a rabbit hole into infinite abyss. And so that was a funny moment of oh, we need to skip around that endpoint. So for 2 days, we just sat and just crawled through thousands upon thousands of non-relevant URLs in a circle. So that was pretty cool. I had to pull out a bunch of those, but things are looking good. I suspect that the difference of about 10,000 might actually just be all the redirects that are currently still live on the live site that aren't live on the archive snapshot. So it'll be interesting to get in on the comparison to that. So what we're going to now is just getting all this stuff up and onto Query and then sort of getting it hosted so that it'll actually be pinned on the DWeb so that anybody can grab it at any given point. And so we will, next week, we'll be publishing hashes. Hopefully we'll get that to the, is there an analyst meeting this week or is that?
Not this week, but next week.
Perfect. So
Monday night, yeah.
Yeah, in time for next week, we will have a distributed web copy versioned of all the work we've been doing. So, looking forward to it, but it's working, so we'll see. Oh yeah, if anyone else wants any other domains crawled, particularly you Sunlight folks, holler. We have a script that does this stuff fairly straightforwardly now.
That's awesome. Okay, we ran a little bit over. Why don't we call it a day? I think we have some good priorities set so that we can sort of know what our focus is on, and we'll just sort of take it from week to week, and then we'll take it from there. What's the ESI meeting?
It's a chat we've got scheduled with some Columbia folks.
Yeah. Got environmental impact statements.
Oh, okay. Got it. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.
Bye, everyone.